Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And since we are a global community today, good morning and good evening as well. We are excited to have you with us today as we take a deep look on the issue of working together for a just energy transition in the global south, inspiration for legislators, implementers, and civil society. As German Federal Environmental Foundation, we have been funding exemplary and solution-oriented projects for the protection of the environment for more than 30 years, with a special consideration of small and medium-sized enterprises. We focus on environmental technology and research, nature conservation, environmental communication, and protection of cultural assets. So far, we have supported more than 10,300 projects with a funding volume of around 1.9 billion euros. Additionally, we award the German Environmental Prize, one of the biggest environmental prizes in Europe. It honors individuals and companies that make a decisive and exemplary contribution to the protection and preservation of our environment now and in the future. Today, we are experiencing the grim reality of war in Europe, something thought virtually impossible until just a few weeks ago. This carries serious consequences in many ways, including the energy sector. In light of this, fundamental sustainable transformation towards creating an independent and local energy production is becoming even more essential. Germany is the primary focus of our foundation, but we are all living in a globalized and interdependent world. That is why we are fully aware that we need to work together to commonly achieve the betterment of all, especially when it comes to renewable energy solutions. As war rages in Ukraine and other parts of the world, which often include conflicts over resources and power, this is even more painfully obvious. The Paris Agreement is our framework. We need global strategies which enable local action on a scientific basis. We need to strengthen the discourse and implementation processes as we strive for climate neutrality. And we need a socially inclusive energy transformation, a transformation that will have to go hand in hand with changes in other sectors such as agriculture, mobility, consumption, and many more. This requires local and global discourse on every level. Members of Parliament play a special part in this. They carry the responsibility to create political and legal frameworks so that the necessary innovations and technical solutions can flourish. This obviously cannot be a one-fit-all approach. Instead, we need to take into consideration the different local circumstances and the different cultural backgrounds. Then a successful transformation can become a reality. We also need to recognize the social ecological aspects of the energy transformation, such as energy security and energy access, the effects of global supply chains, the strengthening of local creation of value. If we want to push the transformation forward, we must recognize the importance of an open, international, and cross-sectoral discourse. Especially members of Parliament of all countries and of all levels will have to be included in a fair manner in order to be truly successful. We are delighted to host this event today in cooperation with the Global Renewables Congress, established at the World Future Council in Hamburg. Together, we wish to drive forward a global and socially inclusive energy transformation. Today, we welcome distinguished experts to discuss the issues. Tuning in from around the world, my warmest welcome to the Honorable Bärbel Höhn, Chair of the Global Renewables Congress, former Member of Parliament of the German Bundestag, former member of the Board of Trustees of our foundation, and now acting Commissioner for Energy Reform in Africa for the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. A warm welcome to Dr. Sarah Jane Ahmed, the finance advisor of We20, a cooperation initiative of a group of finance ministers from 55 climate vulnerable countries. Also a warm welcome to the Honorable Paola Vega, former member of the Costa Rican Parliament. Also a warm welcome to Catherine Edelman, founder and CEO of the company Fosera, a manufacturer of solar home systems. And also welcome to Dr. Joachim Fünfgeld, the Department Head for Economy and Sustainability for Brot für die Welt, the globally active development and relief agency of the Protestant churches in Germany. And last but not least, today's moderator, Stefan Schurig, strategic advisor to the Global Renewables Congress. Welcome to all of you. Together we will now dive into the question of how can we achieve broad cross-sector collaboration and what can legislators do to accelerate the much needed shift towards renewables and a secure future. So welcome, let's go to it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, many thanks, Alexander. This was excellent kickoff, I have to say, for an excellent 1.5 hours ahead of us, where we are discussing how we work together for this, what you mentioned, the just energy transition, with a particular perspective this time from the Global South, and with a particular perspective on the role of legislators, which is why we have some legislators here. The role of legislators to actually translate scientific knowledge, technical knowledge, and learning curves from different countries into binding policies, which is why we also have experts here today from the private sector as well as from science. So I really look forward to this. But not before I again thank first the Federal Environmental Foundation, DBU, for its support to the establishment of the Global Renewables Congress and for its co-hosting of this event today. Special thanks, I know Verena, you don't like that, but special thanks to you because you've been initiating this event. It was your idea and it was a great, good collaboration with you to set this up. So I actually really look forward to this event. As Alexander mentioned, I've been volunteering today to moderate and to guide us through our discussions and our interventions. A few important remarks before we kick this off. The meeting will be recorded and it will be later published on YouTube. So be as frank as you can in your interventions, but be aware of that, that we are actually planning to use this. The chat will also be saved for follow-up writing and will be provided to you if you're interested. So the chat is not gone once we leave this meeting. And you will be muted during the event to avoid echo things and technical issues, which we actually should be able to manage now after 2 days familiarizing with Zoom and other virtual meeting technologies. So you will be muted and please turn off your camera if you're not speaking or so that you can focus really on the content. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the team of Anna Skowron and to Bärbel Höhn. As Alex said, Bärbel Höhn, it is almost impossible to compress her CV and her impact on the energy sector in a few words or an introduction. I know I've been saying that a lot, but Bärbel was my hero when I started to work on energy when I was 20 or 21 or 2 as the State Minister for Environment and Agriculture, when what she was back then really asking the question on how long we can really work on coal and challenging coal companies and supporting them in their transition to as far as this was possible back then. She's now the Energy Commissioner for Africa, mandated from the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. And of course, we are really delighted to have her as the chair of the GAC. Bärbel, you will speak in a minute, but before that, Anna will come in, Anna Skowron, who is heading the energy work of the World Future Council and actually co-managing together with her colleague Naomi Duwels, who's also on this call, the Global Renewables Congress. Anna, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and hello, everybody. I'm thrilled that so many people were able to join today. And before we go into the deep dive of the topic of today, just to give you a bit of an overview what the Global Renewables Congress actually is. So let's see, I hope you can see that. Always a bit challenging.
All good, we can see it well, Anna, go ahead.
Perfect, can you still see it?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Yes, so the Global Renewables Congress is a parliamentary network for renewable energy, which was initiated back in 2018. And initiated really very much, and thanks here also from my side, to Bärbel Höhn, who was a driving force behind the discussions, similar to my colleague Stefan Schürig, Anna Leitreiter, but also Claude Turmes, who is now the Minister for Energy in Luxembourg. And the idea behind the Global Renewables Congress is really to connect ideas, to connect change makers, who for us are legislators, because parliamentarians are very much sitting at the forefront when it comes to policy making and really are the most important keys really to unleash just energy transformation and are responsible to implement enabling policy frameworks for such a transformation. And as such, the GRC really aims to connect legislators, not just from across countries, but also from across parties and across governance levels. So be it on the national level or the subnational level, and to really try for them to have a platform for experience sharing, what kind of policies have worked in which circumstances, what did not work, and try to build the capacities needed for developing global and national, subnational renewable energy policy frameworks. Last year, as you can see here, we were very much focusing on how renewables can contribute to a more resilient society, not just in the context of COVID recovery, but also in the context of energy security, harnessing local benefits of renewables. How can we ensure that such benefits are also used by local communities, and what kind of policy frameworks, for instance, community energy in Germany have succeeded in the past? And I'm very happy to say that the Global Renewables Congress has an excellent advisory board from across sectors, some of whom are today here as well, like Dr. Sarah Chen Ahmed and Catherine Adelman, and who seek to strengthen parliamentarians in furthering in the understanding of what is needed by different sectors to really unleash energy transformation, and what can legislators do to help them also further their advances. And with that, I would actually like to give over to our chair, Ms. Bärbel Höhn. And Bärbel, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think that's good. I think you can hear me, right?
All good, Bärbel. Yeah. Just go ahead. We hear you.
Thank you, Anna. And first, I would say thank you to Alexander Bonde and Vera Exner, especially to the DBU, because you are supporting us, and we can work only because you are giving some money for our work. And what we have to do is really a big job, because the climate crisis is the greatest threat to humanity, and especially the countries in the South, global South, they are suffering most. They have the floods, they have the typhoons, and they have the droughts, although the people there, they are not responsible for all this climate crisis. And in this situation, Stefan asked me some years ago that we have to do something. We have to overcome the climate crisis. And he had the idea of founding a network of parliamentarians to support them for the goal of 100% renewables. And that was a starting point, and our starting point for climate justice. And although we know that renewables are really better than coal and oil and gas, they are cheaper, they are more independent. We can see that in the COVID pandemic period, but also now in the threat of the war in the Ukraine, the aggressive war of Russia. So the oil prices are increasing, and the people in these countries of the global south, they have to pay a lot when they are importing fossil fuels. So renewables, sun and wind, are not having a bill for us, so they are for nothing. And so the people there in these countries can use sun and wind even better. And although we know that renewables are creating jobs and income and can overcome hunger and poverty for the people who have no access to electricity, and all the other advantages, especially for women, we see that the influence of the oil lobby, of the fossil lobby, is big. And the decision makers in a lot of countries, they're looking for big projects, and even the same in Germany. So we have the debate in Germany too, but also in a lot of countries in the global south. And we think that parliamentarians in this situation play a major role, because they are the bridge between the local level and the national or regional parliaments, because they have the voters on the local level where we are installing renewables, and they have the situation and the possibility to look for legislation in the parliaments to reduce blockades and can support renewables. So they have really a very, very important role to overcome the climate crisis and to install renewables. Our view is that the most important fact is a political will to support renewables. And if you have the political will, you can install the laws, you can install the acts, and you can really look for increasing of renewables and trust more the renewable energies. And it's very important to have cross-party networks. Maybe that is what we learned in Germany, because we were successful with our Renewable Energy Source Act, because we had parliamentarians from all different political groups. And this group of parliamentarians was supporting renewables. And so we could come in Germany of about 50% of our electricity coming now from renewable energies. But we have to act differently, because in different countries we have to look for a different work. In industrial countries, we have to mitigate, we have to reduce CO2, we have to replace fossil fuels by renewables. In countries of the global south, we have a lot of people who have no access to electricity. In the whole world, 900 million have no access to electricity. And from this 900 million people, 600 million people are living in Africa. Half of the population in Africa have no access to electricity. And from these people who have no access to electricity, 90% of them living in rural areas. So we can't say, please replace your coal electricity by renewables. We have to say, we have to install climate-friendly electricity. We have to install renewables or maybe off-grid solutions in these areas to help the people to reach the sustainable development goals, to overcome hunger, poverty, and create jobs. To give you maybe a short overview, I will shortly tell you 3 examples of our work. The first one, we have some contacts to Sierra Leone, and our partner there is Candy Yumkela. He is a former Secretary General of UNIDO and the former president of SE for All. And he organized with us a conference in Sierra Leone where 4 countries, the Menyo River region, that was Sierra Leone, that was Liberia, that was Cote d'Ivoire and Guinea, representatives of these 4 countries came together, and we had some days conference there, debated how we can support renewable energies and looking for clean cooking. and even the president of Sierra Leone had the opening speech of this conference. And the second one is our partner in Minnesota, a state in US. And he is a senator there. He is the chair of the Energy Committee. And he is from the Republicans. And that is very important because we would not only work with Democrats or Social Democrats or Green Party, we would like to work with all. And we told him that especially the farmers have a benefit of renewables. And we made a conference, he organized a conference of 11 states in US, in Canada, and we made a communication with farmers of Schleswig-Holstein. They told their colleagues in the US and Canada that they are supporting renewables and they have a benefit of it, and they have another sort of income, because an income of producing energies. And he is now working together with his colleague from the Democratic Party, the chair of the Energy Committee of the House of Representatives, and they both, cross-party, they are both now initiated the concept for renewables and the energy concept of Minnesota. And the third point is that we are concentrating now in the future a bit more on countries in Asia, because in Asia, a lot of countries are looking to invest in coal industry and coal fire plants. And we would like to convince them to invest in renewables and not only in coal. And so we have some colleagues in Bangladesh and Philippines, Indonesia and other countries. And our great member, Lorraine Legarda, Honorable Lorraine Legarda from Philippines, she's very engaged in renewables, and also Honorable Sabah Choudhury, former president of the IPU from Bangladesh. And we are working together with them. We make studies for these countries to see that they are really benefiting of renewable energies. And one of the main points is that we have an exchange of these good examples, that we can support all of them. They can help each other. And that's what we are doing with our network. That are only 3 small examples and maybe an overview of the work we are doing. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bärbel, for your insights. One can really feel that it is very much experience-driven, and that is exactly what we want to achieve also with these kind of formats, that we exchange those learning curves from the different perspectives. Especially one point that you made, I think, is just bears repetition to a certain extent, which is that we should look at energy not so much from what source it comes from, but what service it provides. When you look on energy from the service side, in terms of preparing food or food generation, or basic things like light or electrification for communication technologies, or to run machines, whatever, then it sort of helps you to shake off a little bit this focus on how you produce energy, but rather look at it from the services to overcome poverty, what you mentioned. And another point that you obviously have a lot of experience with is cross-party cooperation. I know that the senator you mentioned is also with us today. I've seen him already on the screen here. Hi, Dave, from our end. It's good to work with you and to really sort of not look into what divides us in terms of positions, this or this, but to really focus on what unites us, and to see how we can help unleashing this technology that sooner or later will provide the energy that we need for the services that we've described. So I think that's an important part to really look at energy, not just from the sources, but also from the services. And the political will, as we know, is the big question on the political will is what generates political will. I hope we hear a little bit now from our next speaker on that one, but also the special civil society perspective. Please make sure everyone who's listening to us use the chat and put your question and comments hide it as a question in the chat, and feel free to contribute by doing this. Now, as mentioned, we're now here from Joachim Fünfgeld, who is head of the division Economy and Sustainability from Bread for the World, which is a development and relief agency of Protestant churches here in Germany. It's a long-term partner of the World Future Council. We go back a couple of years already, really working on these issues in the different respective countries. Joachim, it's really good to have you, and we're curious to hear from your perspective what it needs to work together for a just energy transition in the global south. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thanks to all the organizers to having me here today. As Stefan mentioned, we are working quite closely together with the World Future Councils for years now, and I had the pleasure also to follow closely the whole development of the GRC and all the work you are doing. It has been quite inspiring since the beginning. So I'm quite happy to be here today. As you mentioned, I work for Brot für die Welt, Bread for the World, a development organization. We are working on a wide range of topics relating to development. Our target group is always the most marginalized and impoverished people in over 80 countries. And we work solely with civil society organizations in those countries, both in project implementation and in political advocacy. Why this focus on civil society in our work? Well, we think civil society organizations are credible and knowledgeable advocates for marginalized people. They have knowledge of local needs. They have knowledge of local solutions. They can create ownership for local people. They can help finding approaches that work locally. Thus, we think, or we are convinced, civil society's role is crucial in development, and especially, I think, if civil society can work together also with parliamentarians, on whose role Bärbel has just elaborated. So I think strong collaborations here between parliamentarians and civil societies are needed. Also in the field of energy, we work on different aspects on the energy transition. Energy access, of course, an important one, Bärbel mentioned. We closely work on 100% renewable energy solutions. I mean, we have like 20, 30 years now to fully phase out fossil fuels in terms of climate. So we work on 100% RE solutions on the local level, on 100% RE villages, but also on national strategies in many countries. Of course, we work on advocacy against false solutions and on hydrogen also now. And I think in the field of energy, it's particularly important to closely collaborate with civil society to implement solutions that work. Stefan just mentioned the energy services that at the end need to work and to help overcoming poverty. So we need, for example, cook stoves that are culturally accepted. We need energy services that in the end fulfill the needs of the people. We need to identify suitable business models. I just had a project proposal from a partner from Bangladesh who is trying to build up a women cooperative, building a new business model for 100% renewable energy village. And it's quite inspiring to hear their innovative approaches on that. So all that collaboration with civil society is crucial in the fight against poverty. And of course, also in terms of advocacy, it's crucial to understand local and national power structures, legislation, and so on. So the role we see for civil society in all this is to, of course, be advocates for marginalized and impoverished people, to be a watchdog against false solutions, but also to be innovators. And I think all these roles are now more important than ever. When I was asked to participate in this conference, I think it was months ago, and we were, I guess, living in a bit of a different world. So I think, as our foreign minister Annalena Baerbock said, when the Russian attack on the Ukraine started, we woke up in a different world now, and I think we also need to look differently on the global energy transition now. I mean, the attack on Ukraine is a tragedy in itself, and we are in close contact with partner organizations in Ukraine and neighboring countries, which do a tremendous job to provide humanitarian assistance there. But the impacts of the war on global energy markets and on development countries are enormous. It makes the whole world poorer. And we see already how high energy prices increase energy poverty, lead to higher food prices, which might lead to famine. And of course, the full consequences cannot yet be fully understood, but the impacts on the global south will be enormous. It seems likely that fossil resources remain quite expensive for quite some time now. And we already see how governments and energy industries react. And while I think we all would agree that those high fossil fuel prices and the obvious point that fossil dependencies are a security threat make the case for strong RE expansion, but we also see already, we hear from partners from Nigeria, for example, that the government there thinks about increasing its oil and gas exports to export to Europe now. We just learned that Brazil passed a law allowing mining and large hydro in indigenous territories. So a lot of decisions are being taken now and quickly, and they might lead into the right direction, expansion of RE, energy saving, energy efficiency, or they might lead into the wrong direction, expanding fossil fuel exploration. So it's more critical than ever that we support civil society organizations locally and work together with legislators to avoid those decisions going towards further fossil fuel expansion and to work on real renewable energy solutions. And when working on renewable energy solution, it's quite critical to understand that their point for sustainable development, to provide more energy access, to fight poverty in general, cannot be taken for granted. So it's important that we implement renewable energy, let me say, the right way, with local ownership, and really providing energy services that fulfill the need of the people. We all know the examples of wind farms that on indigenous territories. We all know examples of land grabbing also in the implementation of renewables. So we need to avoid that and work closely with civil society, especially now. And in that context, I think it is also crucial that countries like Germany increase their budgets for development cooperation, increase their budgets for energy partnerships with the global south, and not reduce them as the German government is currently planning. So we all need really to fight for more engagement in international collaboration, and also see that many countries from the global south are hit by multiple crises right now. Climate crisis, energy price crisis now, the COVID pandemic, an international debt crisis for many countries. So that we need more support in general, and more energy transition, and a strengthening of civil society in general, which is also much under stress with shrinking civil space. We shouldn't forget that as well. And I think I finished with that, and we will go more closely into details in the discussion.
Yeah. Many thanks, Joachim, and explicit thanks for not dodging the elephant in the room, for not mentioning what everyone, especially here in Europe, thinks, that this is a different world now. So I think that's a very fair point, and it is probably as far as an analysis can go at the moment where prices leads to. My general feeling is that it will put more water on the mills of renewables in the long term, and in the midterm, it is very hard to judge at the moment where this goes. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sarah Jane Armand, who is the finance advisor to the Vulnerable Group of 20, to the V20, and belonging to the Climate Vulnerable Forum. And she's a great partner of the GRC as well. The CVF has established a global parliamentary group, which is partnering with the Global Renewables Congress. So, and I especially like, I have to say, this link to climate prosperity and the climate prosperity agenda. Whenever I mention this, I notice that people start listening again when you speak about the climate prosperity agenda. Looking forward to your intervention, Sarah. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. So the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the V20 group of finance ministers represents 55 vulnerable economies, and the current presidency is vested in the government of Bangladesh. And I'm very glad to join you today to share vulnerable country perspectives. Efficient use of power and renewable energy brings cost competitiveness and has been an important job creator. And yet, despite record-breaking deflationary prices of renewable energy and storage, despite continuous innovation in long-duration storage and soon enough green hydrogen, and despite the energy transition making economic and financial sense, we are not on track to limit warming by 1.5 degrees centigrade. Despite all this, over 350 million people across the CVF and the V20 countries still lack access to modern energy services. The energy transition and the terms of the transition must include climate vulnerable countries. Else we end up advancing on energy transition and will come up short in effectively responding to the climate emergency. We should not end up with something as disappointing as the EU's green taxonomy, which includes fossil gas. We hope that it's clear that there is absolutely no demand or investor appetite, none, for mislabeled green bonds. The fight to uproot fossil fuels from our economies is not just a battle for the climate, it's also to fight off spiking prices and all the instability and energy insecurity it carries. We can't promote growth by obstructing development, choice even in the short term. We cannot rise if we continue to tie our enterprises and the welfare of our communities to a dinosaur industry in terminal decline. The world already has cost-effective technology in the form of deflationary renewables and storage and grid upgrades to displace unreliable, volatile, expensive, and economically harmful fossil fuels. Mountains of data show renewables are variable and reliable. There will be trade-offs for sure in the energy transition, but accelerating transformation will simply bring more stability and energy security sooner. Renewable energy is shared by all, even as it enhances sovereignty because it represents shared abundance. So it's my pleasure to share with you an initiative of the vulnerable countries called the Climate Prosperity Plans. This initiative intends to build forward stronger by charting a decade of robust socioeconomic development that fully integrates renewable energy and grid modernization, especially for major economies like Germany, to strengthen investment and trade, including technology transfer and innovative business model creation for a modernized energy economy that crowds in market participants and investors that can bring urgency, scale, and quality of investment. We do not ask for charity. We seek partners ready to promote common prosperity. Our task must be to promote strategic investments and to make available a growing basket of instruments that protects global supply chains and security. V20 economies should not be penalized further by allowing the climate risk to grow. This would ultimately lead to high capital costs, which means higher interest rates that will impair low carbon investments. Access to lower cost of capital is urgent, and it is central to enabling the success of sustainable and resilient investments. We hope that Germany, as the G7 presidency, can act on this through guarantee instruments for credit enhancement. This is the next big opportunity for G7 to make a quick difference on risk and the green transition for climate vulnerable developing countries. The benefits this brings in building not only robust trade, but durable trust as well cannot be overstated. Shared leadership is key to designing and driving resources rapidly towards a resilient, sustainably powered economy for all. Completing the energy transition requires serious effort from legislators. Raising renewable energy ambition is essential, but we must also prioritize efforts that can integrate into public policy the welfare of communities, as well as opportunities for enterprises to benefit from the renewable energy economy faster. As I close, I ask everyone to pause. Please pause and now think, because data from the IMF shows that fossil fuel subsidies are spent today at a rate of $11 million per minute. Over $80 million has been spent on fossil fuels as I speak. And over the duration of this event, almost $1 billion spent and wasted on fossil fuel subsidies. Think about it, colleagues. If we diverted this same $11 million per minute to battery storage and grid upgrades, we would be in a different position to complete the energy transition this decade. We would bequeath to today's children within this decade national energy security for all, without fossil fuel driven wars, and a real chance to establish genuine global stability and sustainable economic growth while bringing the promise of a far gentler, inclusive, resilient development finally within reach. So I hope everybody here has courage to divert the subsidies and that we can certainly do this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think it was a very illustrative example for this $11 million per minute on fossil fuel subsidies actually going into the wrong direction. Just as a matter of fact, there's not going, it's not the case that there isn't any money going into the renewable section during that minute, but it's much less than that it goes into fossil fuel subsidies. So I think it is very intriguing, I have to say. So many thanks for that, and especially the role of parliamentarians and the day-to-day challenges on actually translating what we've discussed into legislative initiatives is something we'd like to hear from Honorable Deputy Paola Vega, member of the Legislative Assembly of Costa Rica since 2017, and also a member of the GRC. I think your focus is on environment, energy, and climate change, gender, and green economy. Over to you, Paola. What's your insights?
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. First, I would like to make a very briefly summary of what makes Costa Rica so different in the environmental way. In Costa Rica, since 1948, we bet on a state institution that will bring quality electricity universally and at good cost. There, we opt as a nation for renewable sources, and today, our electricity is 99% from renewable sources, mainly water, solar, and wind. In addition, maybe it's important to say that we have opted for a development model based on the ecotourism. So they have been joined with strong environmental legislation. Today, the 25% of our country is protected by some kind of protection, and the 52% of the country is forest. So we have a big protection in our country. But we also have our challenge, above all, a high dependence on fossil fuels in the transportation sector, especially. We have a very primitive transportation system, or maybe we don't have a transportation system, maybe. And this has an explication because the bus line owners funding many of the political campaigns and applying so economic pressure. Costa Rica is very recognized in the world for his leader on the environmental way. And even if everyone will think that the solid model of the world's leading environmental country will not change, believe it or not, today we are on a risk. I have to say that a dangerous current that says that Costa Rica is still a poor country because of its historical ecological commitment. But when you compare Costa Rica with the Central American region, for example, you easily see that it's not true. And this dangerous current has are very strong today, and they also fight about the national decarbonization plan. They don't believe in that. This new line talks about the exploitation of natural resources as a magical solution for the payment of the internal debt, to the fiscal deficit and the pensions. And they promise us to be like a new Norway to Costa Rica. So it is very, very funny. Today, Costa Rica has never exploited oil, despite being allowed, despite that it's been allowed by the law, because popular opposition every time that it has been tried. The ban is regulated by a decree, not by a law, and it's a moratorium that is legally weak, so weak. So there, we are trying to make efforts to move to a law that bans the exploitation and exploration of oil and gas, but it has been impossible because the pressure for economical groups, politicians, a lot of ignorance. This line is not only focused on the energy transition, it's important. They are denials of climate change. They don't want no progress in environmental matters. For example, they are not allowing that Costa Rica sign the Escazú agreement. That is an so important agreement for Latin America. And they have a strongly position that argument that economical development and the environmental protection are full contradictory. And they are, all day they are more stronger. So what should we do? I think like legislators or like people who believe in climate change and want to make something, first of all, we have to discuss with they, but in their own language. Maybe talk about the economic importance of the energy transition, the business models associated, the global economic opportunities, the creations of green jobs, the cost associated with pollutions and climate change. I know it's very sad to have to discuss about numbers when the reality is so shocking, but it has to be done. Talk in their own language. I think also that the pandemic has caused desperation and hunger. So we cannot just talk to hungry people about climate change. It is insane. We must create a language full of empathy that directly touches the needs of the people, that combines. Here, for example, in Costa Rica, I always insist a lot in the concept of just transition. I think it's so important. For example, one of the challenges in Costa Rica is to have an electrical train. So we try to talk to the people about how they will get to home sooner, of how it wouldn't take hours to get home, those kind of things that make so make it more combined. I think in fourth term, we must expose the interest of the power groups, expose them, it's important. That is the only way to combat the unethical lobbying that they do. In the case of Costa Rica, but I think is the case of many countries, we need to talk about the public budgets. In Costa Rica, we are not getting, we have not been effective with our beautiful environmental legislation because we giving a little budget to this law. So I think it's urgent to talk about the public budgets, especially in issues like the risk management, for example, and make big efforts in that. We need to make associations with the economical agents. For example, here in Costa Rica, we talk about the energy transition or the national decarbonization plan. We make associations with the sector of the ecotourism or some generators of electricity that want to improve in solar or wind or etc. And this is important because politicians alone do not have enough authority, and this must be discussed from platforms with civil society and economical actors. Maybe I have to say that information, data, and science is essential for a public discussion. We must promote a lot of public discussion in the media. And with this, for example, the argument in Costa Rica that we are gonna be a second Norway is easy to refute here. So that's what we have done. And finally, I think, and it is so important, this kind of spaces and the Renewable Congress, for example, I think it's urgent to train the politicians on these topics, on these issues. For example, in Costa Rica, my fight is usually as simple as insisting on something so obvious that the climate change exists and there is not a fake. So there is not possible, and we have to make coalitions to educate the decisions makers, I think. I think those will be my main reflections. And
thank you.
I have questions later.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Paula. Many, many thanks to you and for sharing your insights, which to a certain extent, of course, very much reflect the situation in your part of the world, but much of it can be translated to other parts of the world in terms of the cost argument, in terms of the importance of sort of the collaboration with association or for having change agents that really support with scientific backing and telling the story and so on. I think I've heard that stories from many European countries, including Germany as well. One perspective is still missing today, and I think that's what we're going to hear from Katrin Edelmann, who is the founder and the general manager of Fosera. Fosera, you can describe it much better, Katrin, but it's a German-based manufacturer of solar home systems. And I think that's a very important one, especially these days when we have to think about really massively increasing renewables also in Germany and in Europe. It is important to have manufacturing also, I guess, in our own systems in our countries, so to say. So you're also a member of the advisory board of the Global Renewables Congress, a very important advice, I have to say. Over to you, Katrin.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction, Stefan. I want to speak now mainly also about what Sarah has mentioned before in her talk, that there is still also a vast amount of people left without any access to electricity. So there are right now roughly 800 million people without any access to electricity, mainly located in Africa, but also a few in Southeast Asia. Those people live at the moment mainly with kerosene lamps, with candles and dry cell battery, so very inferior energy sources. And the main challenge for those people is that they also have to spend a lot of money for those energy sources. I know a number from Zambia that it's roughly $15 US per month and per family, which those people are spending for those replacement energy sources, since they don't have yet access to the grid. And for those people, we at Facera manufacture and develop solar home systems. You can imagine them as quite small, so roughly solar panels ranging from 6-watt peak to 150-watt peak. So even if you take all of them together, you're not really getting a lot of capacity. But also what we talked earlier about, it's about the service. So with our systems, we can give those people basic energy service, meaning light, phone charging, and also television or fans. And around like 70% of the population living off the grid in sub-Saharan Africa could actually afford to pay for such a system in monthly installments. I mean, if you're just considering $15 a month, you can easily pay off a microcredit for a solar home system. And therefore, in the market, a new technology has established, I would say roughly it started 10 years ago, roughly at the same time when we also started at Facera, and this is called pay-as-you-go. And pay-as-you-go and Pico PV are combining several market disrupting technologies, which is really cheaply available solar cells, high efficient LED and appliances, as well as new battery developments coming mainly from the EV sector. And this pay-as-you-go helps low-income customers to afford a solar home system by allowing them not to do like one big one-time payment, but rather pay off the system in several small installments on a monthly basis, similar as we also all have to pay on a monthly basis our electricity bill. And roughly after, I would say, in a range of half a year for the very small systems and up to 3 years for the larger systems, the user really owns the system and is then energy independent. In exchange, what is really driving also those pay-as-you-go is the option to turn off the system when the user hasn't paid for a system. So this also gives like a bit of security to such an installation, because the company providing those systems with the microcredit can also switch off the system and turn the energy off in case the user doesn't pay for it. So there's also like the security mechanism inside, both for the company providing the systems, but also the user, since if the system suddenly stops working because it's for example low quality, he also can stop paying and has like a lot of wasted investment. And so with those Pico PV systems, the number of people without access to electricity has already decreased from 1.2 billion in 2010 to, let's say, 760 million in 2019. So those are the rough numbers out there. It's a quite vast market. We have so far 420 million users, and it's an annual market of 1.7 billion annual market volume. And the main challenge we're right now really looking at is how do we get financing for those microcredits? So the sector is looking right now at roughly 20% interest rates. And when we're considering 20%, this is expensive, and especially we're taking those 20% from the most vulnerable groups on Earth. So the poorest on Earth have to pay the highest interest. Of course, you can always argue that interest also reflects to a certain extent the risk. But in my eyes, this is still a major challenge for the whole sector, and which has to be considered, that there's also cheap financing available. For this whole sector, I would also like to mention Kenya as a very positive example. In Kenya, meanwhile, over 70% of people have now access to electricity. They had a very clear legal position. There was also like tax exemptions, and the whole country was open to investments, giving pay-as-you-go a clear sector. In a lot of other countries, this is unfortunately at the moment not so much the case. So there's often a question out there, how has pay-as-you-go to be considered? is it a utility? Can actually a private company provide energy? While this is actually the mandate of utilities. So there's still in quite a few countries a lot of market insecurity, which makes it also for private companies difficult to enter those markets. And since I was asked to also speak a bit about innovation, so one innovation was definitely pay-as-you-go, but I also would like to give a little outlook to where this whole market is developing. And there's, for example, at the moment also the DREC initiative, which is an open source protocol for small solar home systems to create carbon credits, which can be then automatically traded on an online platform, especially also very, very interesting for cooking, since this is really a huge generator of carbon at the moment. And so hopefully also act as a bit of a subsidy for those small systems. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And we didn't agree upon this before, but I have one immediate question, which also would be a good segue to the last part, which is actually our panel discussion. But my question to you then would be just when you work in these different parts of the world, what would you be, what would be your main expectation on a member of parliament? What would you expect that would give you investment security?
I mean, this is like still a major discussion in the whole sector, how to approach this. And there's more and more the opinion coming through that especially access in rural areas, I would say each country where we have built the electricity grid, we had to agree on that there will be, especially in very remote areas, connections which have to be somehow subsidized. And so when we're actually looking at this whole financing topic, there maybe also has to be a will that we are creating funds in which companies like this can tap in and so get cheaper access to credit, which is not 100% reflecting the commercial rate.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to kick off the panel discussion now with maybe an initial reflection by Bärbel. What you've heard, what are your thoughts on it? And just so you know, I've seen your suggestion, Leila, Uled, to just report or share very, very brief insights from Tunisia. I come to that in a minute. And also thanks for your comments on the chat and regards to Deepal here, a long-time champion for renewables in Bangladesh. Also to the question of Siddharth Spiras Daraya, who we will also, or this question will also be addressed. So, but first over to you, Bärbel. You've heard private sector perspective, you've heard the climate vulnerable forum's perspective and the different views on climate finance and Joachim's points on the current situation. Maybe a brief flashlight on your reflections, Bärbel.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. Very brief, because we would like to hand over to the audience. I think most important from my experience, even not also as a chair of Global Renewable Congress, but also as special representative of energy in Africa, is that we need the civil society, because when we are talking about decentralized solutions, we have to talk about good maintenance. If the people don't take care of the investments, often they fail, and in some minutes they are broken and can't use any longer. So it's very important to combine this decentralized solution with education and training, and with a good maintenance for these investments. And the second very important question is financing instruments. So that was one of the main points. I was working as a special representative of energy. And for example, in Germany now, we made a construction of a foundation that gives that has 3 points. The one is donations from the government. The second is private investments, because we are working together with crowdfunding, crowd lenders. And the third is the local entrepreneurs, because they have their business models. They can invest for off-grid solutions. They make the maintenance and get some money when they are selling the electricity. So, but we are now always at the point. So our foundation started in December last year. Yeah, so we needed some years to make it clear, and I think now some more and more other instruments are on the market, and we have to do it because we need a push. We need to scale up. It's not only some villages, not only some points. We need to scale the number because we would like to overcome hunger and poverty, and that's especially in rural areas, because it's not only that they have no access to electricity. The other point is they have an increasing population. So in most of the countries I am visiting, half of the population is 18 years and less and younger, 18 years and younger. And that means an explosion of the number of children. And so they need some perspective. And I think it was very important from Paola to see the daily problems and the resistance, because that is just we would like to talk about. Paola is not alone. You can see in all the other countries we have resistance too. We have it in Minnesota, we have it in Germany, we have it in Costa Rica and all the other countries. And so I think it's a better feeling to make an exchange of our experience and learn from each other how to overcome this experience. And last is, I think we will not solve the problem without the women. So especially in Africa, the women, they are the main points, for example, of the solar home systems. Many companies make their contracts only with women because they trust them to pay the money back with pay-as-you-go systems, and they don't trust the men that much. So I think it's important to do it. It's important to look for innovation, as Catherine told us, because all these countries in Africa are more digital than we in Germany, you know. So it's a wide map, and we can start with the best technology we have. And so I'm optimistic. I'm especially optimistic for renewables. We can do it, but we need networks, and we need debate, and we need to encourage each other.
Excellent, many thanks. And I think we gave justice to the fact that the Global South is not just the Asian countries dealing with the transition part, but also about energy access, which belongs in many parts, also in Asia, but also in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, to the question of the energy services and how we generate this access. Sarah, I'm going to come to you in a minute because I'd love to hear a bit more from your end also with regard to the cost question that Paola mentioned as sort of always the elephant in the room. So be prepared to be put on the spot. But before, we had a comment from Leila Ouled, I think, who is a member of parliament in Tunisia, if I got this correctly. Leila, if you feel comfortable, please unmute yourself and just share a few of your thoughts, but only a minute or 2 minutes or so, because we are short in time. But over to you, Leila.
Hello, thank you for this invitation, and I'm very happy to be with you. I want to present our experience. Tunisia is like many countries that are victims of climate change and is dependent on high hydrocarbon purchased on the international market with very high prices. Therefore, the energy transition is an economic priority, environmental priority, but also a national security priority. Until now, the Tunisian has a solar plan which with 30% to share in 2030. Until now, we achieve only 3%. the part of renewable energy and the mixed electricity. We have a regulatory framework allowing production by the private sector. We have financial and taxes incentives, and we strengthen the role of energy transition fund. Tunisia have a transition fund, which it's an innovative mechanism to allow and to encourage the private investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Tunisia has a success in to develop thermal.
Okay. Leila, we can't hear you. Your line was interrupted. Anyway.
Solar and photovoltaics. As a parliamentarian, I am for my experience.
Leila, please go ahead.
As deputy, I created the. Do you see me? Hello?
Yes. I think, Leila, the last 20 seconds belong to you, so please, but the connection is a bit unstable. So if you, just one final thought maybe on your particular role as parliamentarian. Leila, over to you.
As a parliamentarian, the sustainable development and renewable energy were the theme of my electoral campaign, and therefore this theme weighted the work for sustainable development.
I hate to interrupt you, Leila, I have to say, but I think we can't hear you. We will follow up later on and maybe have a chance to revisit this
different with
question.
This network, we were 150.
Leila, thank you very much. Don't be angry with me for interrupting you, but we will follow up with you later on. But thanks for daring to come in and share your insights from Tunisia. I know Tunisia already has a certain track record on addressing its energy sector. Sarah, this would bring me to the question again that Paola also raised with regard to the cost and the cost argument. And I know that what I've actually learned a new term, which is called JETPs. JETPs are just energy transition partnerships, which are emerging from the UNFCCC context, which are now also discussing the G7 context. You mentioned it. And my question would be if those bilateral, multilateral partnerships, like the energy transition mechanism that has been discussed or suggested by the Asian Development Bank at the moment, is this something that will help us to address the cost argument? Is this something that will help us to tell people that the cost argument must not be only looked at what investments for renewables are, it's actually not costs, but investments, as opposed to what does it cost to not act? And I think that's also part of the story. But how do you look, especially when it comes to the transitionary trajectories in Asian countries at the moment, from coal to renewables, how do these just energy transition partnerships that are being discussed at the moment, how can they help, and what is the role of parliamentarians there?
Thank you for the question. I think the massive oil and gas spending that's happening now puts the so-called cost of the energy transition in a very different light. Not transitioning is expensive. And this is clear. And in terms of the energy transition mechanisms, what's important there for those to really work is transparency in the contracting, transparency in what exactly these tariffs are made of. And it's until that transparency exists, there will be a lot of uncertainty that you can't price at this moment, which means it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging. And so the role of parliamentarians and the role of civil society together actually is to push on transparency so that we can properly and responsibly phase out these growing liabilities, while at the same time ensure that there is proper resources for a just transition, especially to ensure welfare of communities and small businesses actually that are also tied perhaps to the effects of the transition. So that would be my short intervention.
And just the question: is the energy transition mechanism, is this coming up? Does it really have this transitionary element embedded, so that it's not just investments from an old coal power plant to a new coal power plant?
Yeah. So, when it comes to the age of the plant, if we look at grid data, for example, in the Philippines, which is a market where the Asian Development Bank's ETM looks to operate, we find that the age of the plant doesn't make a difference in how it disrupts the grid. Whether it is a teenage plant, a young plant, or an old plant, it disrupts the grid negative. So this is interesting, because now when it comes to the age of the plant, you're looking at it from purely a financial and economic, purely a financial discussion between choosing plants, rather than an economic or from a system level, because it all disrupts the system. So this is, I think, an important takeaway, and the efforts of the Asian Development Bank and the Energy Transition Mechanism is a starting point. And I think it's bringing to light the importance of transparency in order to get a deal done.
I really rely on your advice. You always seem to have very, very good insights on where this stands. Thanks for sharing. And we'll follow up on this later on. I know this. Joachim, maybe I put you on the spot now, and the question also on cost, but also I saw in the chat from Anja Köhne, a long-term champion on climate policies and really an expert in this field, with this comment or question on the role of science with regard to the fundamental opposition that Paola mentioned, that others mentioned as well, in terms of the fundamental opposition that you still face despite economic figures and despite, let's say, scientific, a very scientific, compelling scientific evidence. Joachim, please feel free to come in.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stefan, on this one. Actually, I think the scientific contribution here is key, because I think one of the greatest barriers, besides the question of cost of capital, is, as I see it all the time, is the myths that are around renewable energy. Still, if you look in Germany or in other countries, the discussions are still about, can renewable energies really power and industrialize countries? Can they really fulfill on their promises? Is it really all possible? All those myths that are around are really hard to come by. Here, scientific evidence can really play a crucial role. We have been working in several countries with scientists to develop scenarios on 100% renewable energy pathways. We started in Tanzania, kept on working in Bangladesh, in Costa Rica, and are currently developing scenarios for Uganda, Nepal, and Vietnam. And it's interesting to see, when you discuss with local politicians, local civil society, local entrepreneurs even, to see with how many questions they come in there, like not only the feasibility, but also about the benefits from 100% renewable energy systems, like how many jobs can be created in the countries, how quickly can one become energy independent, how quickly can such 100% renewable systems help to overcome energy poverty. All those questions can be, in a way, answered with scientific scenarios, and it's it's then funny to see people that used to argue for example, coal plants, saying we need coal power in the country. And when you ask them why, and they say, well, for energy security, and you come up with scientific evidence saying, no, not necessary. And they continue, okay, but maybe because it's cheaper. No, scenarios say something else. So you can counter all those arguments with scientific evidence. And you also give civil society a different credibility there, saying we're not just activists waving flags on demos, but we really know what we're talking about. We work with scientists together. So all in all, that's very critical also, that parliamentarians, civil society, and science work together on this.
Thanks. And it reminds me of many learning lessons here that we had in Germany as well, debating issues such as base load and things. And you always have said, no, it can actually be different. My experience is that it actually ultimately science matters more than the operating system that contradicts it. So science can actually change the operating system in which the business model exists. So that would be my humble experience here. Paola, the question to you again is, you have been, just as Bärbel and a few others here in the call, really dealing with the day-to-day business of getting through with the message among parliamentarians. And if there was one thing that you think would be really important to change or to do as an MP, what would it be? What was your success story in terms of what worked as a parliamentarian to get renewables highlighted, to get renewables implemented or translated into legislative policies or whatever? Is there one thing that you say, oh, well, that always works? Is it again the economic case, or what's your take?
Yes, Stefan, it is difficult, but I think our key action should be to change our ship. We are fighting against the climate change, so we are so hurry, but we need to be patient and talk with the people in another language to develop some language that people can understand. Most of the times we used to talk in a very scientific way and in a very technical way. People do not care about that. If I going to a poor woman in the coast and talk to her about the climate change, maybe she will close the door and tell me that is not important to her. But if we go and talk about the food, about the opportunities, the jobs, etc., maybe it's gonna be different. So we need to make two strategies together. One, talk with the enemies in their same language, in the economical way, talking about the opportunities. If they say, look what Norway did, we need to tell them, but look what Germany is doing now, something like that. And we must make another language for the common people, to the citizens, to involve in that and make them join with us in that.
I like the way how you put it. Talk with the language of the enemies. I think you could also say try to understand them as far as this is possible. Sometimes it's probably not possible to understand them, and then at some point you just what Joachim said, I think you just need to make the case that it's just not true. That it's just not true that baseload is an issue, or that the grid will collapse, or that anyway, but I very much like it. It seems to be a very honest and experience-driven advice from your end. Maybe, Katrin, before I close with a closing question to everyone, maybe you would like to come in and share again some of your experiences, Katrin?
Regarding how we best convince people or how to communicate best.
Okay, yes. If you think this is the one you can answer.
I was wondering if there was a specific question or.
No, the question basically is this, does that resonate what you heard from Paola, like, in terms of getting parliamentary initiatives off the ground, but also involving the broader public and being able to build on the supported on a broad public support in terms of energy. Is this what your experience is really one of the driving forces?
Well, I would say yes. In some contexts, this works very well, and there is definitely support. I mean, as I mentioned before, a good legal basis is key, especially in the sector we are in, where we're providing solar home systems to small communities off the grid. So definitely there has to be like a good legal framework. But when it comes to support of the civil society, I would say since our solution is like very easy and also it very much makes like economical sense. I think for us, we're in the lucky position that there's not a lot of convincing needed. But of course, we're still facing this financing question. So, but what Barbara shared earlier is definitely a great step into this direction. And I'm very excited to check that out and see if this is maybe also something we could propose to some of our partners working in the Global South.
Thank you. Yes. Barbara, you've raised your hand, please.
Thank you, Stefan. There were some questions and some people who would like to be in contact with me, so no problem. You can make a contact by my homepage, for example, or DBU. And the other I would like to say is, if you would like to overcome the resistance, we now will go a new way with our Global Renewable Congress, because we would like to have contact with other parliamentarians, not only with the parliamentarians who are in the Energy Committee, but for example, in the committee who are responsible of the budget, or for example, the traffic questions or social questions, because sometimes it's really a social question too. So we would like to have more support of other parliamentarians and other stakeholders who are working not directly in the energy question, but even in other questions. And I think that's a new way to look for support and to convince the people to go straight forward to support renewables.
Thank you, Babel. And there was also a comment from Leila again, that from her experience, the collaboration with civil society organizations is important. I suppose this also goes to the question of public, generating public support for it. As we have to close pretty soon, and I just want to address one final question to each of you. I guess one thing that has been stated before, but that also comes out of this conversation and from the interventions, is that the case is clear for renewables. Also with regard to the current situation, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are heading towards it, because I call it the operating system still points us into a different direction in terms of fossil fuel subsidies, in terms of countries' resources, and so on and so forth. But on the long run, I guess it will be really moving towards renewables. And our role is basically here, and especially important for parliamentarians to translate it so that it goes quickly enough to really at least meet the target to not reach the 1.5 or the 2 degrees. I guess that's important. Before I close with the final question to each of you on the panel, I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank again our co-host, the DBU today. Thanks for your great questions. It was sometimes a bit challenging for me to follow the chat and to follow who sort of had indicated to speak and so on. But I haven't read everything, but I think it was really very rich comments and questions there as well. And again, as said, we will provide you with that content later on. Now, my final question to everyone, and you only have a couple of seconds to think about it, and then a very short answer. If there was one thing that would really be the most important rate limiting factor for renewable energy, one thing, what would it be? You can freely decide what is the rate limiting, the most important factor for renewable energy. Don't think this is this requires now a scientifically based answer. I just want to grab your thoughts on, if there was one thing, what would it be? I see Joachim nodding, so I hope you already have an answer. Joachim, you start and feel free to hand over to your fellow panelists.
Well, difficult one, of course. The one thing I would choose is political power of the fossil sector, which has been established over the last 150 years, and it's now really, really fighting back.
So you would choose that power and then transfer it to renewables. This is how I understand it, right?
Yes, and we need bold and quick decisions, especially by parliamentarians, to break that.
Yeah, okay. I dare asking Sarah next.
I think it would be innovative business models paired with low cost of capital in developing country markets.
Okay, very good one. Katrin, you come in next so that we close with Babel as we started.
I would say the will. We all really need to have the will to change and maybe also get a bit of our comfy situation right now and just like see the situation as it is and really bring off the power and the will, all of us, to change it.
Thank you. The will. Babel, that is something that you have enough from, I think, and you had in your times when you were minister and long-term member of the parliament. What's your answer? And then feel free to close us.
I think it's important to convince the people. So we must take the production of energy in the hand of the people, because that's democracy, that are not the big companies. And so that's right economic and democratic energy transition.
Okay. Well, many thanks. Paola, please.
Okay. No, I think is make transition affordable to the people. Because in Costa Rica, for example, diesel is cheaper and fossil fuels are cheaper for the
price. Yes.
Make it affordable.
Yeah. I think that's one side of the whole just transition partnership or just transition narrative and system, that it has to be affordable and bearable by people. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being on the panel. Thanks, everyone, for remaining in the chat for such a long time. I think it was a very rich and dense discussion. We will follow up with the GRC on this. And I guess I can close us now. Thanks again. Stay with us and stay positive in challenging times. All the best, everyone. Stay safe and be in touch soon. Thank you.